Okay, so this is actually chapter 3 now of the Win with Seller series. And if you've been with us before, what you remember is that this is actually a systematic process. This is a sort of a 7-step model. Everything that we teach is based on models that we know work. And last week, we led off with sort of the lead conversion model. We talked a little bit about what needs to happen to convert those leads, to generate those leads. We talked about the importance of why listing leads are more powerful in your business than buyer leads. So we shared a lot of basic science models around the listing side of the business. Then on Tuesday, we talked about the pre-listing process and really how important it is to have a methodology to provide some information in advance of your meeting. Now, was anybody here last time around who can remember why we advocate that you do that? And for starters, probably less than 20% of the agents will do that. Most agents will go right to the listing appointment when it's time and not have spent any time and energy into creating sort of a pre-listing process. But what's the rationale for it? Anybody remember? Okay. Well, let me remind you if you weren't here. The reason for that is simply this. There's a lot of things that we want people to know about. And we also know that when we get face to face, I don't want to spend all the time talking about me. That's the downfall. And you're going to see as we go through this, that's the downfall with what most listing presentations are, is they're just sort of talking about me and my awards and my recognition. And if you're newer, my company's brand recognition is about me, 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 me. And that means when we get face to face, it's not about them. And if we're really going to have success, we really need to be using our time to talk about their wants and their needs. We touched on this morning in our conversation practice, that Dale Carnegie in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, says your own name is the most important name in the world. Your life is more important than anyone else's. And so focusing on other people is how we win with them. And yet there is still stuff that they do need to know about that we can send them in advance. It's important that they know about my company and any of the awards that we've got and our market penetration. It's important that they know about the market environment that they're in, some of which we'll talk about in this session, but a lot of it we can send in advance. So to have a pre-listing package and a methodology of getting some information in advance to them, it does an awful lot of the heavy lifting. It pre-sells you. It solves and answers a lot of the questions that they have before they even know they have them. And so I'm going to really encourage you to take the time and to develop and to craft a really powerful pre-listing package of information and find a way to deliver that in a way that's powerful. That's where we were. And those videos exist in our Agent Toolbox. In the video resource folder, in the tab for classes, those videos are there. So today, here's where we're moving. We're moving to the listing consultation. Now, you see that I'm choosing the word consultation here versus listing presentation. How many times do people think of a listing and they're told to practice a listing presentation? I don't want you to practice presentation. And what's the difference between consultation and presentation? As you think about the two words, what's the biggest difference between the two? And I'd love somebody to just chime in on that.
In a consultation, it's more of a dialogue back and forth, whereas a presentation is just one way typically.
Right. A presentation assumes that I know what it is that you need to know. And I'll be honest with you, when I'm in teaching mode, in training mode, that's more of a presentative type of a model where we're pushing information your way. In consulting, what we're doing is we're asking questions and we're determining what's important to focus on. So presenting is delivering a prepared content designed to communicate information that you've already decided is what people need to know. Consulting, on the other hand, is asking questions to get a better understanding of somebody's needs and then only sharing what's truly relevant for their situation. When you think about having possibly a financial consultant or a doctor, a medical consultant, when you go into the doctor's office and you start to talk to them, you don't sit down and they immediately write a prescription about what medication or what procedure you should engage in. They ask a lot of questions. And the truth is, you don't need to know everything that they know. You only need to know what's relevant to your situation and take action based on that. And so I really want us to get in the habit of having a consulting conversation that starts to reveal, of all the different things that I know how to do and all the different things that I could do, what are the ones that are the most important to focus on? And don't worry about the things that don't matter right now, right? It's a different approach. And the reason why I want you to do it is for a lot of reasons, one of which is that one of the realities that we have to confront is we're in a profession called sales. And I know that a lot of us object to that idea. I did for years, is to say, look, I'm not in the sales profession. I'm a consulting profession. I'm in an educational profession. I'm in a helping profession. I'm in all these different things. And I think the reason for that is because so many of us have so many terrible images about salespeople. If I was to ask you to, in your mind, think about a salesperson, tell me the kinds of words that are coming up when I ask you to describe a salesperson. Anybody?
Pushy.
Pushy. That comes up frequently. What else?
Doesn't listen.
Doesn't listen. Comes up a lot, right?
Doesn't care about my needs.
It's not about me, it's about you, and the visual images, right? Frequently, we're seeing somebody who probably wearing a suit that's maybe a couple sizes too small, doesn't match, clash, all these images. We don't like them. And that's not how we want to self-describe who we are. In fact, if you look at research, the Harris polls that research lots of different professions, if you were to ask and rank order the public in terms of what professions are the most esteemed in our culture and what are the least esteemed, would it surprise you to know that salespeople don't do so well on that list? Does that surprise anybody? What do you think the number, just out of curiosity, what profession do you think the public has the most regard for? And it doesn't change much through the years.
I'd say doctors, medical profession.
You're in the right profession. It's not doctors, it's actually nurses. Nurses are seen as some of the most revered. Now, it's not necessarily meaning that they're paid the best, but it's the thing that the public really admires, is sort of this sort of selfless putting other people's needs ahead of your own, which seems to be the antithesis of what so many people think of sales. There was one time in history when the Harris surveys were conducting their surveys, there was only one time when salesperson, and the typical type of salesperson that comes in dead last every time, what product are they selling that always comes in last on the list of prestige?
Car.
What's that?
A car, an automobile.
A particular type of car. I don't mean make or model, but
Used car salesman.
It's the caricature of everything that's wrong in the sales. Would you agree? And so look, the good news is realtors are a little bit higher than the used car salesman. We're always bottom third. 1 year and 1 year only, there was one occupation, I believe it was 2018, it might have been 2017. There was one occupation that displaced used car salesman as the cheesiest and sleaziest of them all. Does anybody know what profession that was? Horrifying to say this out loud. It was United States Congressman. Only once did that ever happen.
Right. Sounds right.
It's not a joke. But anyway, here's the bias that we have. If people don't like salespeople, and they think that we're cheesy and that we're all about ourselves and we don't care about them, we have this bias that happens that if we show up and start to behave like a stereotypical salesperson, all that does is it reaffirms that confirmation bias in their mind that we're just like everybody else. And that's one of the reasons why I want us to be careful about behaving like a salesperson. Now, make no mistake, we are in sales. And my definition of sales is to earn the right to guide someone through a self-directed conversation where they can make a decision that's in their own best interest and take action on that decision with confidence. That, to me, is what sales is. It's nothing else. It's earning the right to have a conversation that allows people to gain a different perspective, make a decision that's in their best interest, not mine necessarily, and then take action on that decision with confidence. But when we show up and our presentation looks and feels like everybody else, and the words that we say sound like everybody else, and quite honestly, that's why I'm not a huge fan of some of the scripting that's out there today, because so much of the scripting sounds so stereotypically salesy that it triggers this "I don't like you" bias in people. We've got to not set ourselves up for problems with that. It sets up resistance. Now, if you've got a strong relationship already, and people already know you, and they already like you, and they already trust you, and you show up and you behave in a stereotypically salesy way, they'll show you some grace probably, or they'll call you out on it. But if you don't have that kind of relationship, and you just show up and start to behave in a stereotypically salesperson-esque way, you're going to end up triggering resistance that you don't want. So how do we break that? For starters, one of the things is remember the pipeline. We talked about this in session 1, the opportunity pipeline, that when somebody identifies and self-identifies that they're looking to either buy or sell or transact in real estate, that they raise their hand, and we sort of think about them differently. We move them in our command account from a contact into somebody that we're going to call an opportunity. And then we talk about this pipeline, and the idea of a pipeline implies movement. You might remember, or you can go back and watch in session 1, what we said was, if you think about an oil pipeline or a gas pipeline, it's a structure within which things move and they transport from one place to another. When we think about our opportunity pipeline, and someone identifies to us that they're looking to possibly sell their house next year, we put them in the pipeline. You remember the steps in the process are not to close immediately for the listing appointment. It's not the right time for the listing appointment a year out, but it is time to start to think about what are the different steps that need to take place before you're ready to list your home a year from now. Maybe we've got to declutter the house. Maybe we've got to depersonalize the house. Maybe we've got some repairs to do, and we need time to get those things done. We talked about pipeline management, about getting a commitment to the next appropriate task at that stage of the game, getting commitment to it, following up on that when they complete that task, moving on to the next appropriate task, and moving forward. And when we guide people through that pipeline with them, and we take that journey with them, what it does is it starts to build relationship. So much of the time when you get to the listing appointment, your ability to convert that listing from an appointment to a listing taken, the most powerful indicator is how strong is your relationship to begin with. If you already know that person, if you've been in touch with that person, if you've guided them through lots of different steps in the opportunity phases to get them to that moment where they're making a decision about who to hire, you'll have enough strength of relationship and credibility that it's a pretty easy step. If it's a total stranger and it's a total cold call, it's a pretty hard step, right? So remember, that's why we nurture our database so much. The consultation, though, is what we call a pattern interrupt. It's doing something that's unexpected. And I'm going to encourage you to get into the habit of doing things that are unexpected. Now, I don't mean crazy. Don't get super crazy with this. But what I am saying is that if people have this anti-salesperson bias, we have to show up in a way that doesn't feel the same. And one of the things that we do in showing up as a consultant, when we ask questions and we pay attention to those questions, is we trigger something that's called the self-disclosure loop. We touched on that earlier this morning even, and I think on Friday some of us were talking about this in the Westfield office. When people are self-disclosing about things that matter to them, and not just reporting, not just conversing, but talking about things that are important to them, things that they value, things that they desire, things that cause them fear, or things that they love, whatever it is. When we bear witness to those conversations in an engaged way, when we're paying attention, it actually triggers a reaction in the brain that causes a release of chemicals that cause a sense of enjoying it. It's actually dopamine. There's a couple different neurotransmitters that get released as well. We call that the self-disclosure loop. And when we're consulting and we're asking lots of different questions, we want to do that, even if we think we already know the answer to those questions. I know you. We've been talking for a year. I know why it is that you're looking to sell your house. I know where you're going. I know why you want to go there. Even still, when we're going into this appointment, I want to do a recap, and I'm going to show you where and how. I want to do a recap of that conversation because re-triggering that conversation, re-triggering that self-disclosure loop, re-dripping that dopamine into the conversation now is going to put you in a better place to be willing to hire me because you're feeling good now in this moment when you're making the decision. It lowers the resistance, and it's something that we need to leverage. I'm going to stop here for a minute because you're all off camera still. Questions, thoughts, feedback at this point of the game so far? Here's what we think when we're in presentation mode. Here's what we think happens. We're spewing all of our pearls of knowledge, and people are, very intently paying attention. I've been a trainer long enough to know that you're all off camera. There's some of you right now that are looking a little bit like this, possibly. Not going to call anybody out. But, they don't always tune in because what we think is important may not be important to them. We're going to try to be different. That's the thing. Business today, the competition of business is not won and lost on the battlefield of being incrementally better than your peers. It is won on the battlefield of creating a different consumer experience. And the consultant framework that we're going to share is a series of dominoes that leads to a process that gets to them making the decision. All right, so let's get into it. Here's the challenge. The challenge is we sometimes get a red light. We're not ready to move forward with the thing that we want to move to, that they're not ready to move with us. And so, you go back to the domino run for a second. Anybody ever play with dominoes as a kid? Not the game where you're actually playing dominoes the way that, people play it, when they're older and they line the numbers up. I'm talking about setting up the dominoes and tipping them over and just watching those dominoes fall. Anybody ever do that besides me? Of course, right? I see Ian raise his hand there. The game, the trick is to set them up in the right way so that we've got the right distance and the right spacing. And the purposefulness is setting up the dominoes in the right order. So that's what this framework is going to be, is what's the right order? Because if you got the things in the right order, you don't have resistance. Have you ever driven down the road sometimes and just caught all the green lights and you're getting across town and it's like a breeze? And then other times it seems like every corner you got another red light, and it's frustrating. It's about that happens because, well, it happens in the street because of the timing of the lights, but in the conversational model, it happens because things are not in the right order. The first domino doesn't naturally lead to the second domino, to the third domino. You will still need this prop book that we call the listing presentation guide. And there's lots of versions of this. You can download a copy of this or a template of this in Command. You can download a template of this in the Michael Lewis marketing tools. There's a lot of different places where you can download this. But the way I want you to think about this is not as a PowerPoint presentation where we're going to talk about what's on page 1 and then talk about what's on page 2. What we're going to do is structure the conversation to go through 7 steps. And when you need a visual cue to lean on, because people, you can tell people things or you can show people things. And when you tell and you show, people will learn things at a different level. When you need a visual prop to bring your message home, use it. But there may be times when you never really get to the prop book, especially if your pre-listing materials were strong. And they saw enough in the pre-listing to trust that what you had to say was going to be valid. Still put your prop book together, but think about it as a prop book and not a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, here's the track. And I call it a consultation. I can't even say the word now. It's a track. Why do I call it a track? Has anybody ever been to a NASCAR race or a horse race or a Pinewood Derby race with their Cub Scout children? What happens in a race, not so much the Pinewood Derby, we're just coming down the hill, but in a NASCAR race or a horse race, you got to go through turn 1 before you get to turn 2. You got to go through turn 2 to get to turn 3. You can't figure out who's the fastest if they're all going different routes. And this is the route. And it's going to start with, and we're going to deconstruct all of these together. Number one, take control, set the agenda. That's the first step. Number two is the needs analysis. Number three, we're going to provide some education about the market and the market conditions and the environment that we find ourselves in. Because then in step number four, which is where sellers want you to go first, it is a terrible mistake, or at least a big risk, to immediately start your listing consultation with a pricing discussion in the CMA. And the reason for that is we need people to like us and to trust us before we have a conversation around price, because there's a chance that they don't like what we have to say when it comes to price. And if we don't have enough rapport built, and if they don't trust that we're smart enough to know what we're talking about, we're going to be in jeopardy at the pricing conversation. If we put that first, we're not going to have the rapport that we need. So we take control, we do the needs analysis, we do the education, then we have a pricing conversation. If we can agree on a price that makes sense, then we move onward to setting the expectations of what this experience can look like. And you'll see that could include deconstructing parts of your marketing plan. It certainly is going to include what people believe they have the right to expect of each other as business partners. Then in step number 6, we actually close. And once we close, we finish up with next steps, right? So this is the model. This is the path that the conversation goes. And here's what happens. I call it a track because when you get in there and you're in section number 1, they're going to try to move you to section number 4 and pull you off track. Our job is to figure out how do we find a way to answer enough of that question without getting pulled off track or deferring that question or letting people know that we'll get to it later, but getting back on track, because these have to flow in the right order in order to have the success that we want. Okay. A couple important decisions before we get started here too is, when I go into this listing appointment, am I going to try to do this as a 1-step appointment or a 2-step appointment? Let's talk about that one first, because there's strategy to think about here. How many people, and you're off camera, so unmute or raise your digital hand. How many people prefer to go on their listing appointments as a 2-step? And in the 2-step, here's what happens. Step number 1, I go to the house, I take a look at the house, I see what it is. By the way, there is a tool in the agent toolbox in the listing folders, a tool that I had created for you where it goes room by room and allows you to take measurements and record what types of furnishings or fixtures or whatever. But step 1 would be to go and see the house so that you can go and figure out what comps you need to pull. Then you do your CMA. And then step 2 is when you, with your CMA in hand, go back and do the listing consultation. I saw one hand, Ian, raised for that one. Anybody else think they prefer 2 steps? There's not a right answer. It's just a preference. How many people prefer 1 step? I'm just going to try to go in, and based on my knowledge of the market, I'm going to pull some comps that I think are reasonable, and we're going to have the pricing discussion. We're going to do it all in one shot. All right, I see Gabe's hand on that. Gabe, let me ask you to unmute. What's your preference for 1 step versus 2? Why do you prefer it that way?
Well, personally, I think you want to be prepared for that conversation. So if I come in to the presentation or the consultation with that preparation, when that conversation comes up, I feel like it's a good transition to say, I happen to pull some comps. We can start that conversation now. I like the preparation aspect of it, and I like to show my clients that I've kind of thought of this ahead of time in case this conversation came up.
And if you're going to do it as a 1 step, you're going to have thought of it ahead of time, which means in your qualifying conversations, you're going to be having to ask some detailed questions about the house. Tell me a little bit about the house. What improvements have you made in the house and things like that? So you know what comps you're going to go try to pull that would be reasonable comps, right? So you can do that in a moment.
Correct. And obviously I want to let them know that, in order for me to get a better comp or a better price, I'd like to walk the house, take a look at some of the unique qualities that your home has versus some of the others that I pulled, so we can have a more accurate number.
Now, when you do that walking of the house, do you prefer to, sort of have a conversation that says, look, I'd like to just kind of go through it, see it in my own eyes the same way a buyer would see it for the first time? Or would you prefer to have them come and walk you through the house and show you around?
I'd prefer to do it on my own, for a few reasons. One, it gives me the time and space just to kind of be in my own thoughts without anybody influencing me. And then second, I feel like it's a way to also assert yourself as the expert. If you have a homeowner sitting in their living room while you're walking around, kind of looking at their home, they're in kind of a submissive stance. That kind of asserts where I am and where they are in this transaction, and I'd like to maintain that that dynamic.
Okay, and you have a strategy. You've thought it through. You have a plan, and it's clear. And I know this to be true, but it's clear that this isn't your first sales rodeo. You've been in sales before, and you have a plan. And you choose to do it as a two-step. What's your rationale behind the two-step model?
Well, I guess it depends on the situation. Like I don't think I would necessarily do a two-step if it was somebody in my sphere or something, because then it's likely I've been to the house, I know the house well, so I don't really need to make that second trip. But for the listing presentation I'm going on this week, it was something I got from the Cole Realty resource. So I don't know these people. And I wanted to, of course, getting somebody to like you is a huge deal for getting business. So, I think the two-step helps in the fact that it helps me to build rapport, because not only did I talk to these people when I initially called them, I talked to them when I sent them their housing report. I got a call back from them when they asked me to come to the house. I went to the house and checked it out, where they toured with me, and we just had a conversation about, what they're looking for and what they need and their timeline with everything. It allowed me to come in. It's allowing me to come into the listing presentation on Wednesday with a much deeper relationship with them than I might have had if I just said, let's do it all one and done. And
Yeah.
I do, maybe it's taking me a little bit longer, but it builds a stronger relationship, I think. And also I had the chance to walk the house and see it for myself, and now I can use my CMA and comps based on a further understanding of the house rather than just an initial understanding or a street view.
No, I think they're all fair reasons, and I can tell you, I can point to lots of really, really top world-class agents who come in on different sides of this. There's not a right answer. It's what's your plan and why. If you're going to go two-step, and again, if you're newer or if it's in a market area that you don't know, let me go back to one step for a second. In order to do a one step, you have to really be knowledgeable about the market. It's one of the reasons why I encourage people to sort of pick some geographic areas that they really become specialized in, where they see all the inventory and they preview all of it, and they know what things are trading for. And they know, if I was to describe, a 4-bedroom, 1.5-bath colonial style home with about half an acre lot, with average, finishes, hasn't been updated necessarily in 20 years. If you know the community well enough that based on those descriptions, you can come up with a price in your mind, plus or minus $100,000 maybe. But that, are you looking at a $300,000 house or an $800,000 house? When you know that, by asking the right questions, you can pull some reasonable comps. And then when you get there, as you see it in your mind's eye, you can make adjustments in terms of this is better or this is worse or whatever. And it informs where you take that pricing conversation. If you don't know the community well, you're probably going to have to do some research. And then it's probably going to require you to do a two-step approach. And just know that if you're going to do a two-step, make sure you get back on step number 2 quickly. Don't leave a lot of daylight in there. Because what'll happen is, if a strong one-stepper gets in between your step 1 and your step 2, if there's a strong closer who gets in there, you might not get back. And so that's something that you want to think through. Touring the house alone or touring the house with the seller, just keep in mind that for lots of different reasons, a lot of agents like to do it themselves. They like to do it unobstructed. They don't want the seller necessarily trying to let them know all the things that they did that they think add value to the house that do not. They're going to potentially try to upsell you on all the improvements. Take a look at this remodeling job. Isn't this beautiful, this addition? I did it myself. And you're thinking, you're an accountant, right? I can tell by the workmanship. But wait, this is special. See the wallpaper here? This wallpaper is really special. If you hold the black light to it at night, Elvis Presley's face emerges and you're like, shoot me now. Just shoot me. Because they have all these things that they think made it special for them but you may not make it special for everybody else. And so sometimes agents choose to do it on their own because they don't want the sellers to try to upsell them. I would say if you're gonna, and you may make a really strong case for why you want to use that as a rapport building time. Make sure though that if you're going and having them show you the things that they've done, really try to steer the questioning, control the questioning, so that they're not necessarily trying to upsell you on things that they think matter that you know don't. What you're really doing through the tours, you're seeing it yourself, and you're asking questions about their experience, about living in the house. You know, what was the best part of growing up, of living in this community? What did you like the best about, you know, this house? When you bought it, what features did you fall in love with? Let them self-disclose while you're watching and you're building rapport. It's all really good, but have a plan as to which way you want to do this, and maybe try it different ways and see which way works best. Finally, where to conduct the consultation. Many people will advise to do this in the kitchen. I don't know if it has to be the kitchen. What I do know is that you want this conversation to be in a part of the home where it's relaxed and it's casual and it's not super formal. Sometimes people have very formal living rooms or dining rooms. You know, they have that one library room off the living room that they keep behind the French doors that nobody ever goes into. It's just where we collect our museum pieces of furniture. Probably not that space. It's just a little too uptight. Somewhere relaxed, somewhere comfortable. Here's what we do. We go through the house, we tour the house. Here's the conversation. Before we sit down or wherever we choose to be, I like to begin with this phrase. This is a planned conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to just take a minute and let you know how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I do recognize that there's lots and lots of different agents out there that you could have chosen to have this conversation with you about, you know, selling your home. And I want you to know that I take it seriously, and it's not lost on me. But the first thing that I want to do, in whatever way you want to do it, is I want to start by showing some gratitude and appreciation for the fact that they've invited me in. Why should I do that? Other than the fact that your mother would be so proud of you. But why else? What's the strategy here?
I think it sets you off on a good first foot where, you know, they are probably expecting to hear a lot from you and not all fun. So I think to thank them and kind of break down that what they expect to hear and have them like hear something nice might be a good start, and put them at ease and make them a little more open to listening because they might hear something good again.
Okay, like that. Any other ideas as to why we would throw some gratitude out in the very beginning?
I also think you know, just showing appreciation is a gift, right? And you know, typically when you give someone a gift, someone likes to reciprocate that gift to you. So the more that you are in a gracious mode, the more hopefully that is contagious to your clients, and they want to show that same grace to you as well.
Right. I love it. And it's all of those things, right? It does trigger this law of reciprocity. It is a pattern interrupt. And look, if you're not appreciative of the fact that you're at this appointment, you shouldn't be at this appointment, because these are hard to get to. And someone is trusting you with arguably what could be their most largest financial investment of their life. And they're trusting you to be the caretaker of that. And if you're not humbled by that moment, you're probably in the wrong business. And I will tell you that I think it's really important to get people to like you so that they listen to you. Why not start with letting them know how much we appreciate being there and making them feel appreciated? That's one great way to get people to like you. And people say to me sometimes when I talk about that, well, if you're doing it for that reason, that feels manipulative. That feels icky. And I'm going to tell you, I can understand sometimes why people would feel that way. However, I am going to tell you that the purpose of sales is to earn the right to guide people through a self-directed conversation where they make a decision that's in their own best interest and take action with confidence. You know, the truth of the matter is this: the salesman and the con man have the same tools to use in their toolbox. The only difference is that the salesman is using those, or saleswoman is using those tools to guide a self-directed process that's in their best interest. The con man's doing it to manipulate things for his own gain. But they are the same tools that influence decision-making. And I think if we're not using the tools, we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage. People have to like us in order to listen to us. So we start with this. We set the agenda. The very first section is a short section. Number one, it's brief. Doesn't take long. Here's what we're going to do. We're just going to outline the tasks. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, after I've had my gratitude little piece there, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is how I see tonight unfolding. We're going to spend a little time talking about, where you're moving again, what's happening on that front, why that's important to you. We're going to spend a little time talking a little bit about the market conditions that we find ourselves in and some of the unique things that we'll have to do in order to have success. From there, we will talk about your home, and we'll come up with a price that makes sense to really market the home to its finest abilities. And then we're going to really kind of talk through some expectations of what this plan will look like, what we should expect of each other. If we do all of those things and we successfully agree that we should be able to work together, then we'll make a decision tonight. But we're outlining the steps. Doesn't take long. This is a 90-second segment. But we're doing it. Why is it so important to lay the groundwork as to where we're going? Anybody have some thoughts around that?
The way adults learn, and if you want to capture their attention, you have to kind of give them the roadmap of what's coming, to allow them to process that, think of maybe what questions they have. If they are completely blind, then you're kind of shortchanging yourself as well with good conversation, good dialogue. So it's best to, let them know from the beginning what's coming.
Yeah, for sure. Letting them know what's happening. Here's what adults look for. For starters, moving is anxiety producing. Has anybody moved recently that can sort of attest to the fact that even if it's for a good reason, it's disruptive? And, psychologists will tell you that moving is sometimes more disruptive and upsetting than experiencing the death of a loved one. Now, I don't know, exactly, but the point of the matter is that even though they may be moving for a positive reason, the process is one that's disruptive. And what people are looking for when they're feeling uncertain is someone who can show certainty, that they've got a plan. There's a reason why, if you ever show up in an emergency situation, a car accident, a house fire, when EMS or the police or the firefighters show up, typically what happens is someone takes control of that scene. And what they do is they start giving directions to people. You back up over here. You guys do this, do that. Why? Because when people are feeling in a situation which is unexpected, unnerved, whatever, they need someone with that authoritative figure to create safety for them. By virtue of the fact that you have a plan for what is going to happen, it creates a sense of safety. I'll tell you, we did this a lot when I was in healthcare. Here's what we learned. If anybody's ever had an outpatient procedure, commonplace will be that you may go ahead of time. My daughter just had foot surgery not too long ago. And so what happens is before the surgery, they ask you to come in, sort of in a pre-op visit, and they walk you through the steps. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to park in this lot over here. You're going to come to this bank of elevators. You're going to go to the third floor. This is where you come in. Sally's going to be the person who's going to get your insurance information. Once she does that, she's going to walk you down the hall here. This is where you're going to meet the nurse, and the anesthesiologist is going to come in and talk to you a little bit. And they walk you through those steps. Why? Because they know that on the day of the surgery, if you don't know what to expect, you're going to make it more scary than it needs to be. And if you know what to expect, you'll feel more in control and less afraid. And if you show up and your physiological reaction is calmer, you won't need as much pain medication. You won't need as much anesthesia. You'll come out of recovery faster and go home with less complications. And so we put the time in on the front end to prepare you for what to expect so that you feel more in control of the moment. That's what this is, because we know that this process is triggering a sense of unease in people, and we're just gonna let them know quickly. This is what I expect for today. This is how it's going to unfold. Do you have any questions? You could also hear, if you gave them some pre-work in your pre-listing package, you may ask if they have reviewed that. Do they have any questions there? If they do, write them down. Do not go into answering those questions right now. Don't derail into the track. Just get those questions and make sure that you highlight and get those answered when the time comes in the process. And then we outline potential outcomes. And there's a conversation that we use. And here's one of them. And I've used this for years. This is a planned conversation. Once we go through what's going to happen tonight, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, one of three things might happen this evening. You might decide to list your home with me, or you might not decide to list your home with me. Now, what are you noticing in these conversations, in these two statements? What you're noticing here is these yellow words, list your home with me. These are what we call embedded commands. These are language strategies of words that we're going to use in a specific way to get the brain to be primed to behave in a certain way. So the way that we say this is, one of three things might happen tonight. You might decide to list your home with me. Do not say you might decide to list the home with someone else. List the home with someone else is not the way I want to prime their brain. In fact, if I say to them, list your home with me, and the next sentence say, list your home with someone else, what's happening is their unconscious is getting very confused. And they're feeling even less safe than they did before. This is a very strategic conversation. List your home with me. You might not decide to list your home with me. And then here's the third one. If I determine that my skills and services are not the right fit for your unique needs, I might decide not to take your listing and refer you to someone else who could better serve your needs. Does that sound fair? Give me some thoughts about these phrases here, especially number 3. If I determine that I'm not the right fit, I might actually refer you to somebody else.
That might sound a little manipulative to me. I get why it might be good to say, but if I heard someone say that, I might feel manipulated.
Can I challenge you for a second and say, I understand that you're feeling that way in this context, but if I just said that in a listing appointment, you would not. Having decades and decades of research and experience on this. Now, I will tell you that, how you deliver that. But to sort of set this up as a planned conversation leads you to believe manipulative. You will find that it doesn't sound that way when it happens in real life. It just doesn't. Here's the thing, though, that I think people sometimes push back on. This part here, why would I introduce the idea that I wouldn't take the listing? How does that serve me? Well, the truth is, if you're not the right fit, a professional wouldn't take the listing. You go into your doctor's office, and if it's not a procedure that they specialize in, they're going to refer you to another doctor. That's the way professionals behave. This is also reassuring them that if you're not the right fit, you're going to really behave as a fiduciary and find somebody who's better and make sure that their needs are taken care of. It's a pattern interrupt that causes you to be behaving differently from what they expect a sleazy salesperson to be doing. So while I understand the thought of saying, hey, this language feels like it could be, it might come off in a way that's counterintuitive, it doesn't. It really does not. However, introducing this idea that this is also a takeaway, that there may be a situation where I may not decide to take your listing. And that's okay. Does that sound fair? What will happen in this moment when you say this part number 3 is they're going to say, look, if you're going to put my needs above your own and you decide that I'm not the right fit, you're going to refer me to somebody who's going to take care of me better. Yeah, I'm good with that. And what's happening right now is they are sort of beginning to feel that you're on their side, which I hope you are. Thoughts, questions? Hey, Donna, and I'm totally understanding where you're coming from this. I think as we practice this stuff more and we practice the delivery, I think what you're going to find is that it doesn't trigger that kind of response. Not once in my entire career or anyone who's ever done this have I ever heard that. But you never know. There's always, and if it does, then we modify. Right, but here's the thing. Once we finish step number 1, which is the introduction, then we have to move to the needs analysis. And the way you think about this is you think about the steps. Step number 1 is introduction. Have I accomplished what I need to here? If we have, great. Green light in our traffic lights, green light, we move on to step number 2. And the way that we transition from these steps is to summarize and introduce. That's the technique, summarize and introduce. Mr. Mrs. Seller, now that we've spent a minute or two talking about where we're going to go tonight, let's talk about what's happening in your life that's causing you to be moving in the first place. Now we go into the needs analysis. And in the needs analysis, it's very questions based. Now it's not an interrogation. What causes people to feel like they're being interrogated is if we ask a whole series of unrelated questions. Where were you on the night of the 5th? You know, those kinds of, dragnet or whatever kinds of questions. But what we really want to do is we want to have a series of questions planned out that's designed to understand their motivation, where are they going, why is that important to them, and make sure, even if we think we know it, have them recite them again, pay attention again, affirm those decisions again, engage in a way that starts to trigger that dopamine drip, that we're listening, that we're paying attention, reviews their understanding of why they're doing it. And then here's another place that we want to go in their needs analysis. It's one thing to know what they're trying to accomplish. It's another thing to know what needs to happen to make this a great experience. Because businesses, again, today, it's not enough to just deliver an outcome. We've got to wrap that in a great consumer experience as well. So the questions become, let's just review where you're going, what's important to you about that, how soon do you want to be there, what will your life be like when you get there. Once we get through those and we're comfortable that we've understood, then we move the series of questions to, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, now that I understand what you're trying to accomplish, let's talk about what needs to happen for this to be a great experience for you, because that's important. Of all the things that need to happen in this transaction for you to feel like it was a good experience, what needs to happen? And let them tell you about that. And what kinds of things do you think might come up in that line of questioning? The experiential things that would come up.
Maybe things about appointments, listing, showing appointments, tours, things like that. I don't want a ton of people in my house. I don't want an open house. I want to get this much money, that type of thing.
In order for me to have a great experience, I want to net this much money. I want to sell this quickly. I want to feel like, I'm not being pushed. I want to feel like you're responsive when I have questions, whatever it is, all the different things that make it a great experience. I want to uncover those. Number one, I want to make sure that I can live up to that expectation. But number two, self-disclose, 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 self-disclose. This whole section is built to trigger a ton of self-disclosure and engagement to get them primed to be enjoying this experience. And nothing is more exciting than talking about themselves. Now, once we do that, the next phase, and we move the same way, summarize and introduce. Now that I have a picture of what's going on and why it's important to you to get where you're going, let's talk a little bit about the market that we find ourselves in right now. And this is where we educate, because market conditions vary and what needs to happen is different. This is a great graphic that I would love for everyone to have in their prop book. This is the in the market, out of the market continuum. And, I think, Ian, you might have done a practice presentation on Friday, and you had referenced this. The conversation here that we need to make sure people understand is how do buyers perceive value? And it's the buyer's perception that we want to make sure they understand, not what do we think is valuable. The way buyers think about a value decision in anything, whether it's buying a house, buying a purse, buying a whatever, from a home standpoint, it's two continuum. It's price and condition. And there's a third one out here, which is location. Because location, if the location is right, I might be willing to pay a higher price or accept something in a lower condition. But assuming that the immovable is location, I can't move the house, people are going to look at what's the condition of this house on this continuum is great on this end and poor on this end. What's the price of this house from low price to high price? And the combination of the best price and the best condition are the homes that are the ones that are the most interesting to buyers. Those are the ones that generate competition. Those are the ones that generate a bidding war. When we look at the worst, highest price and the worst condition, these are the combination that is totally out of the market, and nobody's interested in those at all. They don't represent value in the mind of the buyer. Is that's not what they're looking for. Now, we can end up in our pricing conversation in this no man's land of maybe the condition is great, but the price is too high for the location, or maybe the price is good, but it's not in good enough condition for that price. It's some combination of the two that we call no man's land. And the reason why this is so dangerous is while people that are out of the market will not get showings, people that are in no man's land will get showings. People will come and they'll look and they'll say, based on what you're offering for the price and location, and what this one that's in the market is offering for the price and location, this one makes more sense to me, and they'll buy this one. So what we're going to just make sure that people understand is, how does this dynamic work? Because when we get into the pricing conversation, we want to make sure that we really position the home so that it's seen as the best opportunity for the buyers in the marketplace right now. And so we may need to provide some education around that here.
Hey, Hal.
Yep.
Where can I find the right pricing study? I was looking it up the other day and I couldn't find it.
You probably won't find it unless you attend an Otto seminar. But if you
Gotcha.
send me a text, I have a copy that I can probably
Oh.
send.
Awesome. Thank you.
That study's not done every year. The Otto, what he's referring to, guys, is what we call about this right pricing 5% rule. Jeff Otto, who runs the Otto Appraisal Group, which is largely considered the housing authority in New Jersey in virtually every aspect of it. He does a lot of seminars, training seminars for realtors. And one of those is where he crunches the data of New Jersey sales. And he starts to take a look at what's the relationship between the final sale price and the original asking price. And what his data shows, that if you don't build in too big of a negotiation cushion, right? Sellers always want to start high thinking that they can negotiate down. They want to build in a cushion because they think buyers are going to come in and lowball. What the data shows overwhelmingly, and this has been studied by him as well as countless others for years and years, is that what really happens is if we can trigger an emotional reaction where people have this fear that this is such a good opportunity and I don't want to lose it, that will cause not for people to lowball. They'll actually come in strong and maybe even come in harder because they want to take it off the table. The data shows that the sweet spot is about 5% from where it sells. If I think the house is going to sell at 500, I really want to introduce the pricing within 5% of that, which would be 5 to 525. Anything above that, it starts to become more challenging. Now, the reality of this market, and we'll move along because I'm looking at the time here. By the way, I probably didn't say this and I should have, and I hope this doesn't jam anybody up. This is the one module in this series that is really going to take 90 minutes. We're probably going to go close to one. If you can't stay, you're not going to hurt my feelings. This will be recorded. I probably should have put that out there in the beginning. However, getting back to right pricing, in the market conditions with low inventory and high demand, you're going to see there's going to be way more houses that meet the definition of what's really in the market. Because I don't have many options and I need one, I may have to pay more, or I may have to accept one that's not in as great condition. There's more that are going to be in the market when the conditions favor the seller. To the other side, when the conditions favor the buyer, things are really slow. And if I don't make a deal with you, there's 12 others in the community that I can buy. Then what you're going to find is fewer houses are truly in that market of the ones that are going to cause that fear of missing out, cause that bidding war. And we just need to make sure that people understand what market are they in so that we get to the pricing conversation where we're using it with the right frame. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A lot of this can be done in your pre-listing package. But once we get through that education, we believe that they understand it. They understand the market conditions. We might want to show some recent sales in the community just to show some examples, because I would prefer to some extent that in educating, I actually have some closed sales that I can show. This one in your neighborhood was on the market for 4 days. Asking price was $599,000. It sold for $650. I would rather guide them through an MLS sheet where I'm showing them that and asking them to sort of explain what they're seeing. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, how many days was this one on the market? You know what? Hell was on for 4 days. You're right. And it was asking $599. What did they get? Well, they got $650. When I'm engaging them in that conversation and they're saying it, they're self-educating themselves. That's a better way to educate than to simply say, homes in your neighborhood are selling quickly and for top dollar. Once I'm clear that they've got this, though, and they understand the context, now we move on to the pricing conversation. And again, that's a whole nother class on how to do a CMA, how to present a CMA. But I think what you want to do is know the market well enough that you have a target range in mind. If we're thinking the 5% range, and I'm going to tell you, in this market with demand being higher, you can probably go higher. You will go higher. Let's just be honest. But that doesn't mean things are selling over asking price. But it does mean that there is still so much demand. Melissa just said earlier today that she was one of 11 offers. There's enough demand that there's not a lot of wiggle room here. But I want to know, where do I think I want this thing to land? And I'm going to guide people through the comps. I'm going to ask them to, explain, what do you see here? How many days? And we talk about why this was a good comp and where it is. We might go through an adjustment process. That's a whole CMA class, but where they're self-discovering through the way we're guiding them to look at these comps, what's going on in the market. We guide with questions. We don't tell. I don't tell you this house sold for $499. I ask you, what did it sell for? You say it out loud to me. That's self-guided questions. I don't like to recommend a price. And I don't think you should either. I think one of the challenges is that what we do is we come up with our analysis and we say, based on my analysis, I think your home should be listed for $715,000. The inherent risk in that is that you're not going to be right. And it can trip up your credibility. Now, the question that I would ask is the question that says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, based on the review of the comps and the understanding of the market environment, as we talked about it before, what do you think would be a fair price to list your home for? I'm going to ask rather than tell. And I'm going to ask by saying not, what do you want to list your home for? I'm going to go through the education. I'm going to help them self-discover and reveal so that they see it and they understand it. And then I'm going to ask them, what do they think is fair? Because when you ask people what's fair, you will get a very different answer than when you ask people, what do they want? When you ask what do they want, there's a tendency to want to go high. I want to build in the negotiation room. When you ask people what's a fair price, they're likely in almost all instances to give you a more accurate number. And here's what you're going to get when you ask that question. More often than not, your question is going to be met with, that's why I brought you out here. You're the expert. You tell me. Now, where a lot of agents will go is then they'll move into price range. And I think that's a fair place to go. The way I would do it, however, is not based on these comps. I would recommend that you list it between $450 and $499. The way I would, again, self-discover back in there is, based on these comps, it looks like homes similar to yours have sold for between $450 and $499. If that was where offers started to come in, would that work for you in order to get your home sold and move on to Florida? It's always a self-directed question, because I really don't want to be responsible for the price. Because if I am, I pick that number, here's the number, let's go on the market at $450. If I go on the market at $450 and offers start coming in at $410, $415, what do they think about me? I told them $450. They're not happy. And that was my number. If I go on the market and I say, look, based on the comps, I think your home is going to get $450,000 in the market. That's about where we should put it to create urgency. I think your house is worth $450. I put it out there. I start getting a bidding war going. Offers come in at $480, $490. You got one at $615. By the way, Melissa, did your offers end up going over ask? All 11 of them? I don't know about all 11, but a lot of them did. Am I right? If offers come in over asking price, here's what tends to happen. Number one, they're happy because they're getting more than they expected. But number two, and be very careful about this, they don't know that they can trust your pricing opinions, because you said $450 and look where things came in. I'm happy they came in here, but that had everything to do with how great my house was and nothing to do with you and your marketing. Be careful. Try not to own that number. Go ahead, Gabe.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a minute. So what if your client, you use that strategy and your client comes up with a number that, in your mind is just not a realistic number, and you got to get back into the, let's get back down to planet Earth mode. So how might you, overcome that challenge and get them back into, being open and a little bit
Great
more.
question, and one that we have to prepare for that moment, right? I think there are some really good script masters out there who begin this conversation with a frame that says, let's talk about reality and fantasy land. I don't like that personally. To me, that feels a little bit condescending and potentially offensive. However, if we're looking at numbers and the range of where these things are all settling in is around 425 to 460, in that range, and they come out and say, look, based on the numbers, I want 575. My follow-up question is, okay, I can help me understand. What is it in this set of numbers that leads you to that place? I'm not going to make them wrong yet, but I'm going to ask them, how did I get there from this group of numbers? And ultimately, what they're going to have to do then is probably acknowledge to you that there's some other frame of information that they're using to come up with their number. I want more, I need more, I think I put more into it. My brother-in-law got his house sold and he made that much, and I think mine is better than his, whatever it is, but then it's going to give us something else that we're going to then have to address and solve. Okay. And you're still going to have people that say, look, you get them into that range, but I need you to tell me what's the number. Ultimately, I'm going to try one last chance to say, look, this ultimately is your house. I can't decide for you what you're willing to take for it. However, I'll steer them back into the range. If we got numbers in the 450 range, would that work? If we needed to get numbers in the 479, but that takes practice. And again, it's not dodging it. It's really having them own the number, not so much having us own the number. We're going to do this. We're going to practice this. We're going to have this conversation. If we can land the plane, we're a place that we're happy. And guys, in this market, I am really willing to roll the dice. Here's how I would say this. And I think we got a great example of this for those that were in Bold recently with Coach Denny Grimes, who is our Bold coach. What he says is, look, if they want a number that's higher than you can really justify in the comps, number one, they do need to understand that these are the same comps that the appraiser will use when qualifying the buyer for a mortgage. And if the lender is going to give a mortgage, keep in mind, they're only going to lend on the percentage. If they're putting down 20% and borrowing 80%, the lender is going to give 80% of what? Either the contract price or the appraised value, whichever is lower. And that's the key, whichever is lower. So if the property comes in based on these appraisals and you got them to be willing to pay you $675, but the appraisers come in and say $575, the buyer's not going to get all the money that he needs. Is that a risk that you want to take? Right. And the other thing that we just have to, sort of guide them through is the deal going to get done? Right. Ultimately, it's their decision, but we're going to try to steer them into a number and then again, have them own the number. That's the goal here. And it takes some practice. But if we're good, go ahead.
Oh, Hal, and also wait, so the mortgage lenders are going to be looking at the comps, and so are the buyers, right? Did you just say that, or?
Well, the buyers may or may not see the comps, because when things close on public sites like Zillow and things like that, they don't always, all the comps don't always emerge. The only thing that emerges is what the final sale price was, and sometimes that data takes a bit to get there. But here's what I would say, back to Coach Denny, just to get back on that thought. If they want a number that is higher out of range than I feel really confident about, I'm still going to maybe roll the dice in this market, because there is still so much demand. And I don't really know, once I have people bidding against each other, I really don't know how high it can go. I don't know how desperately they want it. I don't know how much money they have. So the thing I would say is, if you feel like it's still something you want to take a shot at, I would say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the CMA, the comps seem to indicate a range that's closer to this. However, if you're insisting upon putting it on the market at this number, I'm willing to roll the dice with you and do all the things that we can to give you the best chance to get that number. However, if the market's response is lukewarm, if it doesn't seem like we have the kind of interest that's going to get us there, then we have to be prepared to make a move quickly. But in a market like this, where there is so much demand and so much bidding, I'm much more willing to take a chance in a market like this than I would if the market was ice cold and this was just going to be my 12th listing that I've got that's overpriced that I have to pay to market that isn't going to sell. Right? Does it make sense? You get to make a business decision there. I'm much more willing to take a shot right now, for sure. Once we get through this part of the conversation, if we get to a price that we're in agreement upon, then we move into expectations. And it's a summary and a transition. All right, now that we've come to a price and understand what we're establishing here is not what it will sell for. What we're trying to establish in the pricing conversation is what's the marketing price that when added to condition location will get buyers to act and to react. That's what we're looking for here. I won't know what the market's going to pay until the market pays it. So I'm not going to own that, but I am going to own the positioning part of, I believe that if we position it here, we can get action going. Once we've got this part of the conversation completed, we move on to expectations. And here's what it comes down to. What are the expectations that they have about our servicing plan? Maybe we address some of that in the pre-listing about the 12 things that we're going to do to get your home sold. Are there any things there that you would want to spend some special attention to, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? I don't need to go through all 12, perhaps, but maybe they want to know more about my open house strategy. Maybe they want to know about my internet marketing strategy. Maybe they want to learn a little bit more about the quality of the print materials that I create. I may ask, do they have any particular things that are important to them that we can focus on? Certainly, expectations around communication. How often do we communicate? What are the things that you want to make sure? If we go a certain period of time and there's no activity, how much time do we go before we talk about it? I always wanted to set up a regular scheduled call, at least on a weekly basis, usually in the beginning of the week. And what I would do is on Monday, I would call all of the sellers that I had through the weekend and talked about the showings that we had, the open house response that we got. But I always wanted to build in a regular call in terms of what was happening or wasn't, so that we could stay on top of what our next step should be. The thing that happens in listings that are going sideways, that we're not getting activity on, is they don't hear from the agent. Agent doesn't have anything to say, doesn't want to say they don't have anything to say, and they're just dormant. And that's the beginning of the end of a working relationship. So I'd like to schedule some communication around that. But what other expectations do you have? And here's a question that I like. And again, it's by design. What do you believe you have the right to expect from me as your agent? What do you believe? This is a little bit similar and a little bit different from what needs to happen for this to be a great experience. This is, what do you believe you have the right to expect from me? Do they expect I'm going to take their phone calls at 3 a.m? Do they? And I don't think anybody would expect that. However, there are lots and lots of people that feel as long as they're up and it's before midnight that they're free to call you and get you to pick up the phone. That's not an expectation that I'm prepared to live by. Here's another set of expectations that I do hear frequently. Not frequently, but I do hear on occasion, and I've had them before. We promised our neighbors that we wouldn't sell to anyone of this particular ethnicity or background or sexual persuasion. And so I just want to make sure that we don't do that. That's not an expectation that I'm prepared to live up to. And if that's what you need, one of 3 things is going to happen tonight. You might choose to hire me. You might not choose to hire me. And if I don't think I'm the right fit, I might refer you to somebody else. And that's okay with me. If this isn't something that fits what I'm willing to do, I would rather let you down now than disappoint you later. But I want to know, is there any last ditch thing? Maybe they're going to say, look, we don't want any signs. We don't want any marketing. We just want you to know and find us a buyer. That may not be something that I'm prepared to do. Go ahead, Gabe.
Is there a reason how that you asked that question in that way instead of just saying, what are your expectations of me? Because that's a very specific, phrasing there. So just
it is, and it is because it triggers the reciprocity. When you have the right to have expectations of me, conversely, I have the right to have some expectations of you, and that's where we're going.
Okay, understood.
What are your expectations of me? I expect you to do this, do this, do this. Well, wait a second. Let me tell you what I expect. It's a more clunky way to get into that conversation. And that's ultimately the conversation we're going to get into because it leads us to the close. So we go through expectations around the servicing plan, around communication, around what that partnership looks like. What do you expect you have what do you believe you have the right to expect of me? And then the conversation becomes, let me tell you, what I expect of the people that I work with. And I want to be clear what those expectations are. Do you have expectations of your sellers? My hope would be that you have some. What would you want from your sellers? Let's just rattle off a couple things that you'd want.
Patience.
Perhaps in certain markets, be patient, be responsive. My expectation is that as part of our working partnership, that we take the information that the market is giving us and we adjust as we need to. My expectation is that you keep the house ready for showings. We never really know sometimes how quickly somebody wants to come. My expectations are that we don't refuse showings if we can avoid it. If there's a legitimate reason somebody's sick in the house or whatever, we need to not have showings, we'll deal with those. But my expectations are that we're going to keep the house ready and that it presents at its best at all times. I would probably have conversations about things like, I'm an amateur chef. I'm not, and I love curried foods and things like that. I'm not a big fan of cooking with strong aromas, bluefish, curries the day before an open house. I think some of those powerful fragrances are still there, and they can be distracting. So we have conversations in a sensitive way about things that will help us and things that will hurt us. That kind of really happens more in the staging conversations, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. But what do you believe you have the right to expect from me? What do you believe I have the right to expect of you? And then finally, the thing that I expect is that we do this under a legitimate contract. We do this with a signed listing agreement. And so here's the final step. We move on to the close. And remember the steps that move from the transition from step to step. When I said summarize and introduce, when we move from one section to the next, I summarize where we were, I introduce where we're going next. Here, it's a little bit like a motorcycle jump. When I was a kid, there was this crazy son of a gun named Evel Knievel. Some of you know him, some of you don't know him. He was nuts, and he would jump his motorcycle across fountains in Vegas and buses. And one time he tried to jump a rocket ship across the Snake River Canyon in Colorado. That did not end well. Broke more bones in his body than I could possibly name. But here's the thing about being a motorcycle jumper. It is a leap. It takes momentum to get across a big jump. It takes momentum to make this big leap of faith to hire you. What we need to do to get to the final close, when we believe that we've gotten green lights in all these other places, what we don't want to do is what a very significant percentage of agents will do, is to just leave it here. Well, now you've seen my presentation, you know where I am. Why don't you think about it? Give me a call in the morning. Let me know what you think. Don't do that. If you don't get this listing signed in this appointment, your chances of getting it signed are really, really low. The data, again, everything has data. Research is done on this stuff. The data is that if you don't get it signed in this appointment, your chances of getting it become less by somewhere between 60 and 70% less. You have an 80% chance now, you'll have a 20% chance if you're coming back. That's why I like to, as much as I can, I do sometimes like the one-step appointment, so I don't give any daylight for somebody else coming in. But the way we build momentum is we go back right from the very beginning. Right? The motorcycle jumper doesn't put his motorcycle right at the base of the first ramp, rev it up, and hope he's got enough momentum to carry him over the cars. He's got to start outside the stadium, and he's got to get that thing going. He's got to hit that at a precise speed, 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, to have enough momentum to get him over his jump. And so what we want to do here, go back to the beginning. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have great understanding of what brings you in the marketplace right now, where you want to go, why it's important to you. You've really outlined what needs to happen for this to be not only a successful experience, but a great experience, which is something my team and I are committed to. You have a really great understanding right now of the market conditions that we're in and the actions that we need to take in order to have success. You've priced it in such a way that I believe will generate interest and activity in the marketplace. And we both agree that we can live up to each other's expectations as business partners. We've got so much momentum right now that the very next question is the close. Are you ready to put me to work? or whatever your closing question is going to be. But we get there by simply starting from the beginning, momentum of all the places we've got agreement and commitment all the way through, and then we go into the close. Otherwise, we look for a moment and it's awkward and it's weird. It's like that night that I was trying to figure out when I was going to propose to my wife. Like, what's the exact moment? I had fantasized a million different ways of where I was going to be and how I was going to ask. But then you start to question, is this the right time? We go back and we structure it. At the conclusion of the expectations conversation, we go back to motivation, work our way through all the different steps, and then get to our closing question. And this is the one I liked. Are you ready to put me to work? That's it, man. That's the process. Give me some thoughts. Give me some feedback. Again, this is my model. It's a very effective model. I've coached to this model for about 10 years. And what I find is not only did I have great success with it, but the agents that I coach to use this model also have really good success. It is just one of the ways you can do this conversation. Go ahead, Geg.
So where could I've tried to take diligent notes, but inevitably I missed some stuff. Where can I find this presentation? I don't see it in the agent toolbox on the Google Drive just yet.
This recording will get there shortly. And I believe truth be told, if you go into the agent toolbox, if you go into the listing presentation model, if you go into the listing scripts in there, and there's some listing scripts. I've taken these 7 steps and I've scripted out what I say at every step along the way. You can go back and you can just sort of start to read through that if you want.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Here's the deal, guys. Again, this is a conversation that goes in stages. And the stages are designed to set the dominoes up in such a way that in the beginning of the conversation, we're doing things that generate rapport, that generate a sense of enjoyment on their part, that we're paying attention and noticing what matters to them and affirming them. Then we move into a place where we teach and we educate and we show that we're knowledgeable enough that we know what we're talking about. Then we move into the pricing conversation, et cetera. Domino, 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 domino. It just leads to this. What you did not see show up here is a commission conversation. And I'm going to tell you, and it seems counterintuitive, but I'm going to tell you that more than 50% of the time, if you've done a great job building rapport all along the way, this is a relationship that you have. It's been in your database. You've been cultivating people through your opportunity pipeline. They already have a basic knowledge and trust of you by the time you get to this appointment. If you run through this model, they have already bought you. The fee is irrelevant at that point. And that doesn't mean you don't have to address it. You're going to have to fill in the blank on the commission on the documentation when you fill it out. But you don't get big pushback on commission. You don't usually. And the one thing that I will tell you to avoid is don't have the commission conversation until you're here. The only thing that a commission conversation can do before they've made the decision to hire you is to disqualify you. And there will be some folks who don't have a strong value proposition who will lead with, I'm going to do this for 3%. I'm going to do this for a flat fee. I'm going to do this for whatever it is, because they don't have a strong enough value proposition. And they're trying to convince the seller that you are the same as they are. That you're the same. You have the same tools in your toolbox. You're going to do things the same way, and you're all capable of delivering the same outcomes. And since we're all the same, the only difference is price. Pick me, I'm cheaper. That's the discount model. And there's lots of agents who tread on that approach. What I will say is that we're not all the same. You can put the same paints in the paint box and the same brushes in the same paint box, and I ain't Bob Ross. I'm not. I can't do that. So the conversation, if it comes up prematurely, can you tell me what your fee is? You know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I can appreciate why you'd be asking that. We're going to defer that until later on in the conversation. And ultimately it gets even to a conversation that says, look, at the end of the day, if we don't come up with a commission model that feels acceptable to you, then you may not choose to hire me. However, I'm going to keep pushing that conversation back, and you're going to find it doesn't come up much if you do it in this way. Once you've got this signed, though, and if they've made the decision, you handle whatever objections come up. If the commission one comes up, this is where it's going to be. If they don't think you're experienced enough, this is where it's going to be. This is why we practice handling objections. But then the last step, again, we went through the building momentum. The last step is this: next steps. Now that we've got the agreement, we've signed the documentation, let's talk about what happens next. It's very much like the way we started. Let's prepare them for the unexpected and take some of the uncertainty out of it. Here's what happens next. My photographer and stager are going to come. They're going to take a look at the house. We're going to get it staged. We're going to take pictures. Whatever it is, let them know what the next steps are in your process so that they feel confident in your approach. And that's the final step. And that is the 7-step model